This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Clean Network teleconference today. I'm Tamara Ledley and will be facilitating our call. Before we get started any further, I want to know if there was ask if there was any announcements today.
I have one. So this is Katie. I just sent out an email about this as well. So just so y'all know, we do have some AGs coming up in a couple of weeks, and we have some clean sessions that we sponsored. So I think next week I'll probably send out that list again, and then I have a document I'm trying to keep track of other interesting sessions as well. So in the email I just listed the specifically clean sessions, but in the document I'm trying to list other things that are relevant that might be interesting to people. So if you have any sessions that you think would be of note to the clean community, you can send those to me and I can collect them into that document. So I'll resend that out again next week in an email also, and then I will also send the link to, we developed a slide that conveners can use, and then a clean membership logo people can use in their talks to kind of help talk about clean a bit at each AGU and get people interested in joining the network. So I'll be sending emails about all this as well, but just wanted to kind of throw it out there once again.
Katie, does it have also the Clean AGU workshop? Because that should definitely, it's actually hard to find on the site, so it should make sure.
It's in there, and I have a link to it in the AGU schedule too. All the sessions and the workshop, I try to put links to the things in the AGU schedule as well, so that, like for me, I like to add it to my schedule and stuff. So yes, that is in there, and there's a link as well.
Okay, great. Also, go ahead, Frank.
I just added the link to the workshop in the chat window.
Okay. And just so everybody knows, there's a group of us from the Clean Network Leadership Board who are meeting. We met for the first time yesterday, setting the agenda. Frank is actually spearheading that, but setting the agenda for what that workshop is going to be. So people have questions about it, they can email Frank.
There you go.
Any other announcements?
Yeah, hi, this is Lynn Cherry. I wanted to mention that we're putting, this is Young Voices for the Planet, we're putting on 6 civic engagement and democracy and climate change workshops in the greater Pittsburgh area, starting the end of January and going through the summer. And so I'll be putting a notice about that up on the Clean Network probably next week. So keep an eye out for it. If you know any Pittsburgh teachers who might want to come, or if you would be interested in participating yourself.
Okay, and it's 6 workshops on civic engagement and what?
Civic engagement and democracy workshops.
Okay, and democracy. Good, great.
Yes.
This is hi Lynn, this is Jen Krutzer from the Wild Center. I'd love to talk to you more about that, but it also seems like it would be a great topic for a clean call, just what you're doing in the workshops and kind of sharing out to the community about that work. I mean, I know you and I've talked about it a little bit, but I think it would be a really great presentation if you have time, or working with others or whatever.
Yeah, Jen, thank you. I'd love to do that. We have such incredible sponsors, like the Phipps Botanical Garden and these nature centers and Carnegie. So I think I would love to do that. Yeah, we can figure out a time.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lynn. Any other announcements?
Jim, maybe I could ask this one. This be sort of I think people got back a while ago. There's a conference coming up in the UK, and I don't know if any of us kind of reached back out to them. So in a way, I'm kind of maybe announcing there is a education conference on the UK, and I don't know if we're doing much to connect with them. I've been meaning to. Has anyone checked in with them?
No. Can you give us a little more details there?
Yeah, well, I'm bad. I should follow up with finding that email and doing that. It was not in London or one of the major cities. It was in a university, and they were looking for folks internationally who, of course, could come. But it was looking to bring together international educators on climate change. I also raise it from the question of like AGU is outstanding. Your folks are outstanding on this. There's how do we stay in touch with people who can't come? Obviously, we're not walking the talk if we have all our educators fly all over the world every time we have a conference. How do we stay connected? That's one thing I want to reach out to them too. I'm not going to go to the UK for it, but I'd love to help, stay connected with them. So,
one thing that we have done in various places is to use this web conferencing platform to bring people into conversations in which there is a face-to-face component, so that there can be remote participation. We don't do it all the time, but if there's a concerted effort, that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other point you're making, Jim, is that Miro, who is working with Mark and others, and I see Abby, you're on the call. Maybe you've been part of the ECOS, which is Education, Communication, and Outreach. What's the S? System? For that is really like clean at the international level. It's an emerging concept, but it's unfortunately it's less supported, and they really haven't found the enterprise to make it true. But under the UN process, there will be people meeting in Poland as part of COP24 that are focused on exactly what we're talking about. And I know Kristen is sending a delegation of business leaders from Climate Generation, but our connection to that is always weak. And the tools to connect are always just haven't gotten as robust as they need to be. So Jim, I think the impulse is totally right. The vehicle for doing it is still not adequate to the task before us.
But we're all in agreement. We're working toward that, and I'm very pleased.
I mean, the other complication, where because the mechanisms aren't quite there yet, the time zone difference can make it difficult also, in terms of participating, at the same time. So that's another challenge. Okay, are there any other announcements?
Mika made it.
Very good.
Made it.
Very good.
Wasn't quite sure.
Thank you, Mika.
But I had to restart my computer, which means I have to find my presentation again. So.
Okay, well, that's okay. We are still in the midst of announcements. I don't know, are there any other announcements?
Not so much. I'm just going to follow up on my announcement and say that I sent the links for those documents I was talking about in the chat. So this is Katie again. These are the AGU sessions and the presentation materials. They're in the chat if anybody's interested.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right. Well, are there any other announcements?
I just wanted to ask, so are we going to be talking about AGU on the call?
Not today.
Further today, not today, no.
Okay. All right. Just curious.
Lynn, I'll follow up with you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so we will move on to our featured presentation today. We have Dr. Mika Estrada. She is an associate professor at the University of California at San Francisco School of Nursing in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences and the Institute for Health and Aging. Her research focus is on social influence, including the study of identifying values, of identity, values, kindness, and well-being, and integrative education. She is the co-PI and director of the NSF's Climate Change Education Partnership Grant that provides educational tools and learning opportunities to San Diego's regional leaders and residents regarding the changing climate. And she is going to talk to us today about Climate Education Partners' assessment of opportunities for leading in a changing climate, working together to protect your region's quality of life for future generations. And with that, Mika, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. So first, I'll just let you know where I am. I'm in Ben Lomond, California, which is near Santa Cruz. And I'm happy to report that there's a blue sky today, which is new after over a week of just, in the Bay Area and here, lots of bad air from the fires. So I'm also on vacation, and this is my one non-vacation activity while I'm here. So
Thank you very much.
see me,
We
I'm at
appreciate it.
a cabin with one dot of cell phone reception, but I do have Wi-Fi. So, well, thank you for having me here today. And I thought I'd just let you know, I was going to present a little bit on some of the data that we've collected over the time that we've been running this project, and talk a little bit about how that's informed the work that we've done. And so I'm going to start with this picture here. I think it's always good to think about why we're doing what we're doing. And many years ago, this picture was taken, and this is actually the hand of my grandmother. And
That's not showing. I'm seeing the first slide.
Oh, really? Huh?
The title
Okay.
slide.
Okay, let's see. I'm not sure how to do this then.
Maybe show the presentation, Mika.
That's what it says. Okay, how do I stop showing screen? Can you see me now?
Yes, we see you.
Okay.
Yes, now we see the hands.
Oh, you do?
Yep, now
Yep.
we see the hands.
Okay, that's weird. Okay, well, that's good. I can't see them. Anyway, these are the hands, and I think that when I do the work that I'm doing, I really am doing that. It's still not going. Can you see the next screen?
No, we're seeing just the hands.
This is really weird. My slides won't advance now.
Yeah, we're seeing like parts of yours. Oh, there's some.
Now we're
slides.
seeing the hands, but with the people, and now the Paris Agreement.
Okay, we'll try. Good. I guess it's working. So this is my grandmother, who actually she passed away just last December, and this is my youngest son, who's now 16. But in the work that I do, I try to be informed by my history, by my past, by my culture. But I think most of us are probably doing this for the next generation, for the young people who are here. And that's not only true of you and me who are on this call, but it's also true of leaders, that they are concerned about the next generation. And everything that we did, we try to remember that. So you all are well versed on this. There's a lot of stuff happening in the world. There's the Paris Agreement that came up. There's been a lot of leaders across the United States and the world who have concern about climate change. And this has actually, I think, Trump's reservations on this issue have kind of catapulted a movement, a local movement. And Climate Education Partners has been a part of that, and hopefully has some things to add that can be responsive to Article 12, which has to do with promoting climate education. So we have that in mind right now in terms of when I share, I try to think about that and how we can be relevant to the times that we're in. So when we started this project about, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when education was done for leaders, often what happened was they were given things like this. They were given the traditional hockey stick and given lots of data. And there was questions as to whether or not they were able to use that data, if they paid attention to that data, and if it was helpful to them. And in order to get a better understanding of how to do education for leaders in a way that was responsive to their needs, we did public opinion polls, and we did interviews with them. And I'm going to share some of the findings that we have from that informed the education that we did. So the public opinion polls in San Diego, just to give you a sense of what San Diego is like, I know it's known for being very kind of conservative and reticent, typically Republican until this last election time. I think Orange County and San Diego did some flipping. But we find that actually in San Diego, like many parts of California, especially on the coast, that there is concern about climate change, and there's awareness of it. And you can see here that 87% said that they were somewhere in the spectrum of sure that climate change was happening. So So we're not talking about a population that's in denial about climate change overall. And you can see the progression here. We did 3 public opinion polls in 2012 and 2015, 2017. And we asked about not only, do you think climate change is happening, but do you think it's motivated by human activities? And you can see here again that across time that agreement and knowledge of human activities contributing has also grown, and that those thinking that it was caused mostly by natural changes in the environment has decreased. So this is the climate in which we've been doing the work. 1/3 now consider themselves absolutely a part of a community that's concerned about climate change. And this is something that we were kind of monitoring across time, looking to see if this community of concern has been growing. And I think somewhat in response to, the fires and the droughts and all of these things that have increased people's awareness of the immediate impacts of climate change in our area. And here's some really interesting things to look at here. So less affluent people are more likely to consider them part of that community that's concerned about climate change. So when we break it down by economic placement, you can see that those who are 50,000 and lower are more concerned and showing more concern and considering themselves part of that community more than those who have, although it's a little bit of a U curve. You can see it. Those making over 100 seem to have a little bit of feel themselves part of that community. And we can look at this another way. We can look at it in terms of the demographic breakdowns. And again, you can see people of color overall do show more concern, or they say they're part of the community. They feel like they can make a difference. And that is higher than the majority white population. So, and you can see it's driven by the African American community, although the Latinos also are higher. And we don't know why that is true, but I know that it's consistent with national data on this. So overall, people of color are more invested in terms of their identity with the climate change, concerned about climate change, and they're more willing to do something. And I don't know if I have it on the slides, but they also are engaged in more things that are environmentally friendly behaviors. All right, so this is also from the polling data that climate change and the environment is seen as a top issue for the region by about 1 in 10. So you can see in terms of the things that matter, of course, this last data that was taken was during the drought. So you can see water shortage is the #1 concerned area. And it's interesting because that is a consequence, right, of some of the climate change. So while they don't name it as the most important thing, the consequences of climate change continue to be important. I'm sure now you get fires as being a really important issue. So in addition to doing the polling data of the general public, of the voting public, we also engaged in key informant interviews with leaders. And this is one of the things that we did at the very beginning of the project to really get a sense of what mattered to leaders and what they were doing already and what we could do to be of service to them. And also we did a round of interviews this last year just to see how things had changed. We can't say necessarily directly as a consequence of our project because of course there's lots of other variables that may be influencing leaders across the time of our project, but we can see that there have been some changes on some of the key things that we were hoping to have influence on. So we interviewed close to 100 leaders in San Diego. Many of them were highly influential people. Here are a few of them that were interviewed: mayors, former mayors, city council people, business leaders, community leaders from the Latino community and from the native, from the tribal communities nearby, people who are in health and in transportation, and yeah, we definitely had people from transportation. So we picked people that were from kind of high impact areas, people who had influence on making decisions that could impact or how we mitigate and adapt to climate change. But we also interviewed people that were in communities that were vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And most of these, about 75 of them, we were able to interview at the beginning of the project and the end of the project. So the information that I'll be presenting is just on the people who we interviewed at both times. So any changes you see are changes in the same people across time. Those who we were not able to interview twice, I didn't include in the data that I'm presenting. All right, so one of the things that we looked at was asking the key influentials, just like we did with the general public, if they identified themselves as part of a community concerned about climate change. And you can see here that in 2012, about 69% said that they were absolutely a part of that community. 21% were stated that they were somewhat, and 10% not at all. So I should say about a third of the people that we interviewed would self-identify as Republican and conservative. About a third were more liberal and Democrat, and about a third were independent. So this is not just the usual suspects. These are people from all over the political spectrum. And so it was interesting when we did the 2012 interviews to see that so many had said that they were felt that they were part of that community. But that did grow. That grew during those time between 2012 and 2017. You can see the not at all reduced down to about 1%. So that almost everybody, every leader that we talked to, thought they were at least somewhat a part of that community.
So, Miki, can I ask a quick question here?
Sure.
Can you tell whether or not that 10% in 2012 that were not at all, did they move into the somewhat, or did they jump right to the absolutely?
You know, that's a great question. I don't have the data in front of me.
Because somewhat didn't change all that much, but the question is, did the actual people in those groups change?
Well, they changed to something, but I don't know if they changed
to
somewhat.
That's true. The question is, did the somewhat group not change, was Mike? I guess that's the other side of that question.
It's a great question, and if you email me, I'm happy to send you. I could find that out.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
We have the data for that for sure. But these are the same people, so they did shift in some way. I don't know if they went to somewhat or to absolute, but they're not different people. All right. And then this was a really interesting thing that we asked them about if they thought other San Diego leaders were concerned about climate change. And this is looking at a scale. We had a yes/no question, and then we had a scaling question. So 6 was absolutely concerned versus 1 was not concerned at all. And we found that at baseline, let's see, oops, I just lost it. At baseline, people, the leaders themselves, thought that they were comparable, but it shifted over time, so that by the follow-up, they were seeing themselves as much more a part of it, even though the change on other leaders went up a little bit, but not a whole lot. So there's another way to look at this. This is, I think, one of the most interesting changes that you can see. So the 2 top circles are from 2012, and this is them assessing themselves, which is the circle you already saw. The 10% not at all, somewhat a part of the community that's concerned about climate change, and absolute. This is when we asked them about their other leaders. Their other leaders in their community in 2012. And they said only 14% of their peers were concerned about climate change, about 70% somewhat, and close to 20% not at all. So we thought this was really interesting because we asked all the leaders, are you a part of this community? And the majority say, yeah, I am. But when you ask them about their other peers, they say, oh, somewhat, but not at all. So there was a disconnect between the actuality of the leadership and what they thought each other's concerns would be. So in 2017, we asked this question again, and one of the things we were hoping to do was to move this a bit, and we were able to, I think, that was to make them more aware that they weren't alone in their concern, that there were other leaders. And this is to shift their perceptions of what's the norm for leaders in San Diego. Are leaders in San Diego typically concerned about this? And so you can see that there was a pretty big shift in what they thought their peers' concern levels were from 2012 to 2017. So the absolute gets bigger, the somewhat stayed about the same, but that what did shrink a lot was not at all. So there was a shift towards recognizing that the peers may also have concern and be at least somewhat a part of the community. So this is good. I mean, this means that we're changing the way leaders think about themselves. Another question that we asked about was whether their concern for climate change, if this was basically because of themselves, they're worried about themselves, are they worried about their community, are they worried about the planet, are they worried about future generations? So the red lines are baseline. This was done 5 years ago, and then 2017 interviews. And you can see this stayed pretty stable. Many of the people that we interviewed, I think the average age was around 55. So they're an older, I'm 51, so whatever old is, but older, and really their concern, remained with the planet and for future generations. So that was pretty stable, just like in the public. That we also found something similar to that. So in terms of one of the other things that we wanted to look at or have some influence on is helping them to identify what the major impacts are in the region for future generations. And we focused on a 50 years ahead in 2050. What would be happening in San Diego in 2050? You can see that there was some shifts. Water resources was a big issue in 2012. It wasn't mentioned as often in 2017. And I should say in the interviews, this is free. We asked the question, what do you think the impacts will be in the region? And then they just answer and we took notes. And we had the interviewers check off things. So we didn't prompt them to name any of these things. These are just what did they state out of the top of their heads when they were asked this question. So there are, you can see that nature's benefits and the impact on nature kind of went up a little bit. Public health, that was one of the ones we were really trying to hit and get more information about out, that there's public health impacts from climate change, and we did see some shift on that. And some of this that I think also has to do with what was in the news and what was happening at the time, of course, for the leaders. So I'm not going to editorialize. You can kind of just look here and see what the leaders talk about. But water resources, temperature and precipitation changes, coastal flooding. I think that's a big one because a lot of the buildings and that are happening now, the building and the planning going forward has to take into consideration sea level rise, and a lot of leaders are aware of that now in ways that they weren't just a couple years ago. In terms of what kinds of things are they doing to create action, they report that they're conserving water, conserving energy. Of course, the things that save money often are the types of climate change action that will happen. Infrastructure is another one that you can see a big change in that. There's been a lot of building and things happening, like I said, about on the coastlines and stuff. And policy also was something that people talked about a lot more this time around than they did at baseline. So there's a lot more action in San Diego. They have a climate action plan, and I think that has really invigorated action at the city level to try and make change happen and respond to the causes and consequences of climate change. And this is looking at what do you see as the top issue to address in San Diego region in the next 3 years. And water shortage, again, at the time in 2012, there was a lot of droughts. That wasn't the issues in 2017. But you do see that the economic development considers to be on the minds of leaders. Transportation and alternative transportation seems to have gone down a little bit. And when people do report on things, the homeless population issue in San Diego has really gone up, and that also was on top of mind for many of the leaders. Okay, so given all of this information, some of it we had when we started the project, some of it we didn't have, but we worked with local scientists to try to identify what were the major impacts for San Diego. This is our education that we did for leaders, really focused on the issue of temperature and precipitation changes and how that impacts water resources and coastal flooding, wildfires, which are very prevalent right now in California if you haven't been watching, and nature's benefits, which had to do with plants and animals, and then health impacts. So when we did the education for leaders, in the initial interviews, we felt that these things weren't coming up that much, and when we did our educational materials and activities, we really tried to focus on these issues. The other thing that we did in our educational approach was to use the tripartite integration model of social influence. And this theory basically states that you can give people information, but if you don't do that in a way that creates them or integrates them into a social group of action, the chances that they're going to engage in the normative behaviors of that group are low. And we use the polling data. We're able to show that this model has efficacy. But the theory is that when you feel you can do what a group does, you feel like you can, and you identify with that group, you feel like you belong to it, and you the values of that group are the values you hold, then you're most likely to be integrated into a group, and in this case, integrated into a community of citizens that are concerned and engaged in climate change and mitigation and adaptive behaviors. So when we did our education, we of course tried to use the best facts and science information that we had, working with climate scientists from Scripps Institutes of Oceanography, but we conveyed that information in a way that built and provided ways in which leaders and the public could increase their efficacy and identity and values, and that informed the work that we did.
Mika, can I ask you a question about this one?
Sure.
So I've seen this before, but I'm seeing it in a new way.
Okay.
You know, and I'm thinking about the work that Noki did. And I'm thinking about what's before us is all these educational professionals of all forms of education are kind of moving into this issue in very different ways, but they're eventually going to be in this issue. It's just a matter of time. But this idea of efficacy, identity, and values as a frame for how they come into it, because I think the Noki work clearly showed that the community of practice was more important than the substance in many ways. That somebody's there with you as a practitioner along the journey with you, so that it emboldens and strengthens you as moving into this new space, which is uncomfortable at the beginning, but then becomes comfortable and natural and aligned with your values.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And at my core, I'm a social psychologist, right? So I, as a social psychologist, I'm very interested in how do we recognize and harness the power of community and each other to help us to engage in the behaviors and activities that are most healthy for us. And that can be anything from exercising and eating well to doing the things that we need to reduce our CO2 emissions and to be able to respond to the consequences of climate change that are upon us even at this moment. So yes, that's exactly right. That the building the community of action is important. And this model is basically saying, if you want to build a community of action, 3 things you can do is help people to feel that they can do what the community does, help them to feel that they belong in that community, and make sure that their values of your community reflect and incorporate the values of the people that you would like in that community. And one of the key pieces on this, I would say, just to step back and some of the other work that I've been doing, is that the environmental movement has been predominantly upper middle class and white. And there's a whole nother community of action on eco-justice and environmental responses that are Latinos and Native Americans and African Americans. And these groups don't always communicate well with each other. And I think one of the key reasons is because the value systems may be a little different in those communities. And to the extent that we can build bridges and help to incorporate the value systems of a diverse and inclusive community, that creates a much larger community of action, which may enable us to make the changes we need to. So I think that value one might be really critical right now if we're going to build up. And that also involves in our classrooms, so that we diversify our student body and our faculty in STEM fields. Ready for me to go on?
Glad to hear. Oh, okay. Should I wait till at the end to comment?
I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
Can I
Well,
take?
what you were just saying about this justice issue, I'm hearing this from so many funders too, that they want to see that integrated into our proposals now. And well, I think I'll wait till the end because I'm or else maybe talk to you not after this presentation, because I have so much to talk to you about.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. And then this is for those who are unfamiliar with Climate Education Partners. Some of the things that educational materials that we developed was a 2050 report. We did it in Spanish and English. We had a bunch of other kinds of smaller reports that had to do with impacts on health, and we had one that was aimed towards more the Latino community, impacts on the Latino community and vulnerable populations. We did a series of videos, which if we had time I would show you one, but there's many of them, and if you go to YouTube and just go Climate Education Partners, you'll see all the videos that we have. Some of them are like this cartoon looking picture here they're really like 3 minutes long, and they kind of go through the science of why is climate change impacting fires, for instance. And it's all done with these kind of infographic type of things. And I think they're actually very usable for children as well as adults. And then we have other videos. You can see the one with all the leaders. There's some videos that we did that were really geared towards leaders. And they were to educate leaders. But one of the cool things about doing these videos is that we had leaders speaking to leaders. And when you videotape a leader telling their other peers that climate change is important and that we need to address these issues, it puts them on the record first of saying that this matters to them. But it also, you have to educate them in the process of them preparing to be videotaped. So you give them information and provide them with ways in which to communicate about climate change. And so them participating in the videos in itself was a really powerful way to do education for leaders. And we ended up having probably about 25 pretty high level leaders that were in our videos. And so I think even if nobody watched the videos, just making the videos was a really great way to engage leaders. And I recommend that if you ever are doing work with leaders. Leaders like to get attention. They like to be highlighted for the good work that they're doing, and we really tried to do that and capitalize on that. And then we also had had tours where we took leaders to places that were kind of behind the scenes, places that weren't always accessible, and they were able to learn about the new grids, how we're dealing with sea level rise. All different kinds of things, and they were usually pretty well attended. We had usually around 25 to 30 leaders go on these tours. We had scientists be able to answer their questions, and they were very successful. So those were some of the things that we did. And this is just a slide looking at kind of the number of people that we were able to engage in. So overall, we had 170 events. We reached over 8,000 people who attended those events in various ways. Sometimes the events were for just leaders. Sometimes they were leaders speaking. So they were a variety of types of events that we did. And this is actually a little bit underreported because we did have some events where we didn't know who was there. So this is only counting the people that we were able to count. But there's.
And are you counting? These numbers are the leaders, or are these a general participation?
These are just people who came. Yeah.
Okay.
And you can see that it grew across time, the number of events that we had. So our years 3, 4, and 5, we had a lot more than year 2 when we were gearing up and getting our resources together. We do actually have data on other, on just leaders. And we actually had tier 1 leaders and tier 2 leaders. And we have data on the number of leaders that we engaged too. And there's somebody asked me one time about this Latino, so it says only one event. There was a lot of Latinos in all of the events. This was we only had one event that was specific to the Latino Chamber of Commerce. But like our public health event had a lot of Latino representation in it, on the panel and involved in it. So that doesn't mean there was just one thing with Latinos, but we only had one event that was specific to that group. Okay, so I have hit kind of some highlights on some of the research that we did and some of the things that we've been doing. This toolbox, if you just Google it, your community toolbox for leading in climate change, this website has everything that we've done. We tried to make it as available and as open. So if somebody wanted to replicate what we were doing, they could go on here and have enough information to really get started. We talk about how we planned and created, figured out what to do, how we convened and learned and used data to inform our approach, how we created our resources, and how we shared them, how our outreach was done, some of which I described today. We also go through how we evaluated and refined this. Like I said, when you want to know how many leaders we actually spoke to, if you go to this website, you can see that. You can also get links from this website to all of the resources and to the videos that we created. And then the Celebrate tab up at the top just goes through and has some quotes from leaders and shows some of the headlines that we had from the time that we were doing this. This is, let's see. So this website was really our final deliverable to try and make accessible to anybody who was interested in what we have done, kind of a step-by-step guide on how to do it. So, this project is winding down and taking new shapes, and we feel that opportunity is knocking, that we're really at a point right now where concern is rising. We've learned a lot, and we're hoping that we can take what we've learned and share it with other people and help advance what's happening at the city levels, particularly with regard to leaders. And I'll just leave you with this last slide, which is some of the headlines that happened over the time of our project. We did a lot of training of people, of leaders, trying to get them to frame issues in a way that would make it more accessible and more interesting to people. And so it was pretty exciting being in San Diego at this time when so much has changed. And I feel pretty proud of our project. It continues. It definitely shaped me and my learning. I felt like I grew a lot in my understanding of how to do effective communication through this project, and informs the work that I continue to do in different areas, but still with regard to climate change. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mika. I really appreciate your presentation. So I'll open it up to questions. Anybody have a question? I know we had questions during her presentation, so I'm sure there's some out there.
Yes, Mika?
Yeah.
Hi.
Go ahead.
So Mika, we each get to work with the beautiful UCSF. You, of course, are in USF, and UCSF allows us to reach 45,000 people a year with the Bay Area Science Festival. And so UCSF is a fantastic institution on allowing science and STEM, and particularly on climate change. The question would be, if when we're seeing like the slide that had the climate science education and bringing information, connecting with leaders as well as the public, how do you feel about this? We have found that as there is more political action, as there is more social action, influencing people on the polls, there's a lot of programs working to try to get the polls numbers to change. People say, I believe in climate change and not. In California, we're kind of past the getting people to believe in it. Is how are we going to really act on this and act in effective ways that will make a difference for generations and bring up the younger people? So what I'm getting at is it worthwhile to differentiate, if we look at the players who are influencing leaders, between recognizing there's a place for everybody, but the political folks, the people are using psychology and arguments, people are giving them money because that influences them, from people who are science and STEM educators. Because what I would say is, when I look at the ways in which we are influencing people, if people are using politics and money, that's a different game. And there are rules to that game, or ways it's played. If you're doing science education, there are rules to that too. You teach the truth. And if we are pretending to be science educators, but we're basically selling junk fast food science, it's not scientifically accurate, is that good for the whole mix? Do you guys try to differentiate, like, the difference between science education and persuasion, which isn't necessarily science education?
Well, it's funny. I think in the first couple lines of the paper that I published in that has the TIMSS model, I really, one of the first things I say is, to a certain extent, can we come to terms with the fact that education is a form of social influence? That we are influencing people when we learn, when we're teaching, and so in my mind, I know that there's this idea that we can impart knowledge that is impartial and that is objective, but most of what we impart is not that. There's a lot of other things around it, how we say it and what we say and who's saying it. All of those things have influence. And so I think that there is definitely value in being an honest, being perceived as a legitimate and honest broker of information. I think in the social influence literature, that's definitely an element that we know from early research in Yale, at Yale, on the research that was done on persuasion and social influence there, that the speaker or the person who is conveying information has to be seen as legitimate. They have to be asking something or providing information that they have legitimacy in providing. So if you're a medical doctor, providing information about painting, you may not get as much leverage as if you are providing information about medicine, right? So it has to be relevant to the speaker. So those things do matter. You can't be naive, I think, in this work. And what we see, I think, at the international level is that there is a huge movement to try and convince people that they can have economic prosperity and continue to address the issues of climate change. That is a framing that is designed to appeal to people, saying that they don't have to, they can have their cake and eat it too, right? And some people agree with that and some people don't. So I guess my answer is that education to me is a form of social influence. We should own it, we should acknowledge it, and we should use what we know about it so that people use information in a way that is helpful to our planet, it's helpful to each other's health. I think if you look at the health literature, maybe that's a place where we can see that diabetes is going up. We know eating healthy is better for people who have diabetes. Do we just give them that fact, or do we help to provide social support so that they can more likely engage in the behaviors that are healthful for them? I think we have to take that model and just apply it to climate change as well. I think it's ethically questionable not to.
I wondered if you could say more about the social, your sort of sociology take on specifically how you were describing when a group of people believed that the rest of the group felt some way that they were afraid to speak out, and so you have everybody thinking that that everybody else doesn't believe in climate change when they all do. And there have been a number of studies I've seen like this, where I know just even going door to door for various campaigns, and you say, no, your neighbor, I just spoke to your neighbor, they believe in climate change, or I just spoke to those, and they're like, what, are you kidding? And they think everybody is just a diehard Republican. No, everyone I talk to on the street, they all believe in climate change. Really? So my question is, if we can, how can we harness that? How can we, once we understand that reality, that somehow they're believing because of maybe the groups that they belong to are saying, their leaders are saying, no, it's not happening, and no one believes it. That how do you have any suggestions of how you can make people fearless, or how they set it up so that that they're not afraid to speak out, and that everyone then realize it's sort of like the emperor has no clothes. Once everybody starts saying it, they realize, oh, okay, well, we all do believe this.
Yeah. So I mean, what you're talking about is about making the invisible visible, right? And that was one of the key features when we first did our interviews, of just realizing how the shared concern was an invisible thing to the leaders, that they felt they were alone. And I live in the San Diego area, and I live on a street where I thought everybody was conservative and Republican, and I did precincts one year, and I realized half the people on my street were Democrat, and I was just shocked because nobody talked about politics, nobody put up signs, nobody did anything to reveal who they were out of fear that they would be the only one. And so I think that's what you're speaking to, is that there is, I mean, that's embedded in us, right? From, if you think about it in an evolutionary standpoint, to be alone and not connected to anybody and to stand individually was to put yourself at risk. It's hard to survive by yourself without social support. And so we're wired for that. It's really, it's something that we're completely and totally wired for. So, so it's not surprising that we need to, and we feel more confident in acting when we have other people around with us, and that there is a sense of security that we have in acting with other people as opposed to acting by ourselves. So if we know that, then why not capitalize on that? In the information, the education materials that we provided, we always had lots and lots of pictures of other people that are in our audience's immediate community. So the leaders had pictures of other leaders, and that starts to build community and recognizable people that they might run into at the next meeting we're in there. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of value in that. And again, it's making visible what's invisible. But you have to know what's invisible, right? You have to figure that out. And I think that collecting and talking to people and collecting data helps us to see things that maybe we don't see when we're just walking down the street, right? So.
Yep. Thanks.
Mika, this is Frank. A related question to what Jim said and to the work I know of that you've done is that the transformations we're talking about, that, you know, based on the science, are decades of work, decades, if not more. And that one of the things when we engage with elected officials and community leaders on these issues is that they have experienced that sometimes their efforts don't transition to the next leader. And leadership changes over time. Over those decades, there are going to be a bunch of different leaders, even in San Diego, but across the country. And so what I'm trying to get at here is the work you've done, I have high value for San Diego across those decades, but then also in other communities. Can you speak to kind of the enduring need of this model as opposed to the success you've had in developing the model?
Well, yeah, I mean, the research, like that TIMSI model, that the tripartite integration model of social influence, was actually introduced, first articulated probably in 1954. So it is an old theory, and has stood the test of time. I think in terms of the community, I think really this is about shifting norms, it's shifting perceptions of norms and inclusion in a community, and that does have a lot of endurance. It's hard to undo something that's done. So for instance, the climate action plan in San Diego, it's actually a really interesting story of that, because it was developed when the Democrats were in power. They put together this climate action plan, and then the new leadership came in and they were Republican, and there was this question whether or not it would be kept, endorsed and kept. And the new leadership came in and they embraced it, and they're the ones who actually passed it in the end. And so it was developed and endorsed with bipartisan support, which gives it a kind of leverage that it wouldn't have had otherwise. So I don't know if that answers your question, Frank, or not, but I think that there's elements of what we did that definitely could be replicated in other cities, that it's really about theories of education and social influence and community building, which we know is important. Communities of action are really important. And when they become a part of the culture of a city and part of the identity of a city, they stick, right? So you think about Seattle, it has a reputation, and there are other cities across the United States that are shifting their reputations towards being climate alive and ready to respond to climate change. And those kinds of shifts where the normative behavior for leaders is to do something, that makes a big difference. And even when you get changes in leadership, they're less likely to deviate from that because the norm is so strong. The social norm is so strong. So I think there's a lot we can learn and replicate in other cities for sure.
Mika, this is Marta. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Oh, cool. This is a great presentation. I have a couple questions. One is if you could talk a little bit about any other differences that you might have found between the European American folks, Caucasian folks, and folks of color. And the second thing is whether the TIMSY model has already been used on fashion or fads or the arts or other communities of action that spread really quickly.
It hasn't. It hasn't been used. The only place it's been used has been with science and STEM education. That's where the most recent research has been, and that's been my research. The old research, really, it comes from compliance, trying to understand issues of compliance right after World War II. So it was used as a way to understand when people will comply with orders. That's where it originally started from. What was the first part of your question? There was something about.
The first part was about what other differences you might have noticed between European American / Caucasian folks and folks of color. And I'm especially thinking about, we do a lot of work with Latinx communities, and the whole social structure and communication is very different. And so I'm just curious, what you found in that way.
I mean, there's a lot more work that can be done in this area, but I think if you look at the national data and even in my local data, the data that I showed, overall, I think basically the barriers to the impacts of climate change are lower for vulnerable populations. And vulnerable populations can be low-income communities, but we know that there's, in the lower economic communities, there's also, you're more likely to be a person of color if you're in those vulnerable populations. Not always, but that means that you are less likely to have air conditioning, that you're more likely to be working outside. It means that you are more likely, you're closer to basically to the earth, right? Your daily life, you might be riding a bike or taking public transportation instead of owning your own car. So there's different ways in which you feel the weather in a different way. And there's also less shade, in inner cities. There's more cement. There are a lot of illnesses of despair, which can respond having like asthma and diabetes and these things, which also make you more vulnerable when the weather gets really hot. You feel it. So I don't think there's a lot of research looking at why, but I know that there's a lot of research showing consistently that people of color are more likely to acknowledge that climate change is happening, to be willing to do something about it, and to actually, in our data, we showed that they were more accurate in their climate science knowledge. that it was better. So I think this is a population that has great concerns. I do a lot of work with Native American communities, and the idea that we're separate from the trees and the ground and the water is just an absurdity within many Native American communities. So to not take care of the water and the earth is like not taking care of ourselves. And that different way of thinking about nature and connection to nature and interconnection to nature makes you make different decisions about it. It's not just to exploit the resources. There's something else that's more important than that. So I think that there is great power and knowledge and actually direction that's going to come from these communities, from the Latino community, my own community, that's just not present in majority culture. But that's just my opinion. And I'm
Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge that we are at the top of the hour here. I personally have to leave and want to just acknowledge the timing. Mika, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very, very interesting and very informative. I invite people to continue to talk now if you have the time, but I will have to leave and want to acknowledge that. And thank you again, Mika.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much.
I only have a few more minutes because actually I'm in the middle of the woods, you can see. And and I had a branch fall on my windshield and break it. So I have somebody who's going to come and fix my windshield in a few minutes. So so I could probably take one more question and then I will need to go.
Mika, are you going to AGU?
I don't think so.
Oh, too bad. Okay. I'd love to, this is Marta again. I'd love to schedule a call with you at some point, if that's okay.
I'm around.
Okay, after vacation.
Thank you.
I can hear people jumping off. So I have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank
I'm
you,
grateful
Mika.
this community is out
This
there
is
doing
great.
what it's
Really
doing.
great.
Yeah, thank you for presenting. That was really great.
Yeah, you too.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.